The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Hope everybody enjoyed a good holiday weekend. We had a Labor Day. Most of you had the off day. I'm sure that most of you also watched Clemson versus Duke. And what a game and what a couple of games that we had this weekend. Of course, we'll get into our week one recap. We'll talk about the AP poll that released earlier this afternoon around 1 o'clock. And then we'll also dive into our week two action where we have a ton of marquee matchups here in the conference, especially with Alabama and Texas meeting up on Saturday night. And then our Saturday afternoon slate features Miami versus Texas A&M. So, Wade, how was your weekend?
It was pretty good. I was up in the Big Apple, far from Southern college football, but, checking into all the games. Actually went and watched the LSU game at Legends Bar, which is the unofficial LSU sports bar of New York City. So honestly, man, when we stepped in there, it felt like you were just walking off of Canal Street in New Orleans into, right back into Louisiana. It just had that good old Cajun Southern flair and felt like home. So cool place to take in a game. Not the result we wanted, but it was kind of a unique take on college football for me this weekend.
Yeah, it's definitely a popular spot. So if you're in the New York City area, definitely go stop by Legends Bar. I'm sure it's definitely a fun environment, no matter the score. So let's get right into this show here in week number two. As always on this show, we get into the SEC teams in the AP Top 25 poll. And there was a little bit of movement with some of the upsets, especially with LSU going down and also Clemson going down last night to Duke. Still the same, the number one team. I saw some AP poll voters put Florida State number one. Some of them had Michigan, but nonetheless, the SEC reigns supreme for now with Georgia coming off their dominating victory over UT Martin this past weekend. Alabama moved up a spot to number three, with Ohio State laying an egg against Indiana. They ended up winning the game, but not really the team that we were hoping to see this past weekend against the Hoosiers. And then number 9, Tennessee, they moved up a spot after completely destroying Virginia this past weekend. And then number 14, the biggest drop of the weekend outside of the Clemson game. They dropped 9 spots from 5 all the way down to 14. And then we have some other movers. Number 20, Ole Miss moved up a couple of spots. There was just a lot of movement. Number 23, Texas A&M. I'm sure that a lot of people saw also Duke is now ranked. They're number 21. And also Colorado is also ranked at number 22 after their big win against TCU. I know that we're a big SEC show, but we're definitely going to talk about, Dukes of the world, Colorados of the world. That's been a very long time coming for both of those programs being in the AP Top 25 poll. So as always, we'll update this. But as of now, the SEC has 6 teams in the bowl. So let's go on now to our reminder segment. If you have any questions, we do this every show. We want to get our fans involved. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, picks, if you want to pick along with us in our week 2 slate coming up, what surprised you this past week? And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to say the LSU dud. We'll definitely get into that game. Maybe you were, not impressed with South Carolina's showing against North Carolina. We'll definitely get into that. But if you have any more additional questions, feel free to leave us a comment, and we'll get to that throughout the show. All right, let's get into one of our fan favorite segments. Let's go on now to SEC Fantasy. And SEC Fantasy is presented by Mahler Bros Golf. If you need to upgrade your golf attire, you can head on over to Mahler's Bro and get 15% off at Mahler Bros Golf Apparel and Gear. You can use code BELLYUP. That's all uppercase, BELLYUP. That's 15% off at MahlerBros.com with code BELLYUP. So first, before we get into the results, we also have our rules. So let's go ahead and recap the rules for our fans out there. So one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, one defense, and you cannot use a player you picked from last week. If you play fantasy football, it's pretty similar to that. We don't really do the flex, and the kickers, but maybe next year we'll dive into that.
Kick
But for now,
yardage, we could add that in.
yeah, we had the position players. I don't know how we would score the kickers. Maybe a point for extra point and field goals made. Maybe we'll experiment to that. So week one is now in the books. Let's see how our teams did. And Wade, why don't you take it away with how your team did? And Spencer Rattler. Actually, first we're going to go on to SEC fantasy draft. I got ahead of myself. I guess the results is going to be later. I might have switched it up in the PowerPoint. But let's go ahead and go on to SEC fantasy draft. See how these, we're going to go ahead and give it away that you ended up taking the cake here just because, Spencer Rattler threw for over 350 passing yards. And you decided to go with a gunslinger that was pretty common in last year's SEC fantasy.
Yeah, I decided to go Will Rogers here. We did not see him in the debut week because of those rules you just showed us. We can't use guys back-to-back weeks. In my opinion, there was no need to burn Will Rogers against Southeastern Louisiana. He has a really favorable matchup this week against Arizona at home. Last year, Mississippi State went out west and took care of business against the Wildcats. The Wildcats are a little bit better this year, but they're still one of the bottom Power 5 teams, in my opinion, especially on defense. So I think that Will Rogers will light him up. He didn't throw for I don't even think he threw for 300 yards against Southeastern Louisiana, but I think that's more about, they didn't really need it per se. I think that the opportunity will arise against Arizona, but it is something to keep an eye on. Maybe under Zach Arnett, this team doesn't commit completely to the air raid like they have in the past.
No, that's definitely a great pick. I'm going to go with the rival quarterback, go to Ole Miss with Jackson Dart. Had an insane game, threw for over 300 yards as Ole Miss put up 73 on Mercer this past weekend. They hit the road to go to the Big Easy and face a Tulane team that's coming off of a dominating victory against South Alabama. I think that that's going to be an offensive slugfest. I think that, Tulane's defense, their secondary. There's been some quarterbacks, we saw Caleb Williams, last year. I know that South Alabama, they struggled mightily. Caleb Bradley threw a couple of interceptions, just too many miscues for the Jaguars this season. But I think that this Ole Miss offense, I think they're looking one of the best in the SEC. I think that they definitely impressed me, even facing a Mercer team. But Mercer, is one of those FCS teams. They have been a powerhouse, and they just really took it to them. So, yeah, I'm going to go Jackson Dart. So we'll see. We have an early Egg Bowl matchup. So we'll see, which quarterback in the state of Mississippi comes away with the most passing yards. So let's go now to the bell cow running backs to see if there's any new faces. This is the first time this season we see both Jalen Wright and the first time ever in SEC fantasy that Cody Schrader, the 6-year running back, is now on here for his first time. So why don't you take it away, your selection of Jalen Wright, Tennessee facing off against Austin Peay.
Yeah, I think that for Tennessee, you do have Joe Milton, and they are going to pass the ball. But I think what stood out to me against Virginia was just their ability to run the football. Jalen Wright went over 100 yards. Milton's not very mobile. He's going to sling it. But if Tennessee wants to establish a run game, it's going to have to go through Wright. So I could see him kind of being an upstart star here on SEC Fantasy for us this year. And your guy Schrader, I mean, he's waited his turn, right? And here he is, year 6, getting his SEC glory.
Yeah, he had a really good game against South Dakota. Had 9 carries for 138 yards rushing. So he got the ball often. I think against Middle Tennessee State, struggled to stop Jalen Milroe in that rushing attack for Alabama. I'm not saying that the rushing attack for Missouri is comparable to Alabama's, but I think that Cody Schrader will be able to pile on some yardage to get, Jalen Wright. I expect Tennessee to find their running game more. I just don't think that, Joe Milton's probably going to play to the half, and they're just going to hand it off to their backup quarterback. That game will probably be over by the half. And I think that Missouri's offense, if they want to continue to be, dominant in the SEC, they got to rely on Cody Schrader. I think that they continue to do that in week 2 against the Blue Raider defense that struggled in week number 1. Let's go on now to the pass catchers. The pass catchers didn't really do too much for us, but you're going to go with Jackson Dart's wide receiver 1. Trey Harris had himself a game. He was a transfer coming in, and he really had a nice debut for the Rebels.
Yeah, I think that he quickly established himself as Jonathan Mingo, as Mingo's replacement. So I think that he has a big role in this offense. Not a guy that I really knew about until I was looking at the box scores, but he's had a pretty good career at Louisiana Tech and just wanted to transfer in, get some SEC exposure and quickly establish himself with 4 touchdowns. So, maybe a step back against a really good Tulane team, but I still think he's going to be a priority target. And like you said, I think that's going to probably be a shootout between those two teams.
Yeah, I think he's going to get his fair share against Tulane. I'm going to go with Dane Key. We saw Key last year a couple of times. Kentucky got a big win against Ball State. Their offense with Devin Leary struggled early on, but they were able to find their rhythm. This week, they faced off against Eastern Kentucky. I just don't think that Eastern Kentucky's defense is going to have any answers for Dane Key. So I look for Leary to build on to his connection for Dane Key. I think that Key is ultimately going to be the lead receiver for Kentucky, and that's going to start here in week number 2 against EKU. And now let's go on to the defenses. The defenses fared well for both of us. These are the easy weeks. We try to pick on teams that have some easy matchups. But you're going to go with the Kentucky defense going up against that Eastern Kentucky team that I was talking about.
Yeah, this pick for me, choosing the Kentucky defense is pretty self-explanatory. Kentucky's going up against Eastern Kentucky. It's an FCS matchup. Kentucky's defense held their opponent last week to under 300 total yards. So I think they can do that again. And just getting a team that we won't see very often, probably in SEC fantasy, out the way so that I can keep an option like Georgia open in the future.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go ahead and take that Georgia defense. Going up against Ball State, Ball State scored 14 against Kentucky. Georgia's defense had their fair share against UT Martin. This defense probably won't get tested until next week whenever Spencer Rattler comes into town. So I think that Georgia's defense gets one more test before, like I mentioned, Rattler and that offense comes into between the hedges, and I think that Georgia's defense will just suffocate Ball State this week and just a mismatch. So these two defenses should have their fair share. Both of them shouldn't get into the negatives. If they do, it would be an absolute shock. But these are definitely two of the top defenses to choose from in the pick of the litter. So I believe next we'll go on now to SEC results for week 1. And yes, so like I mentioned, it was a busy week 1. All the SEC teams were in action. So why don't you take us to how your team did? Obviously, like I mentioned, your team won, putting up 205.
Yeah, I mean, this was all about the quarterback and the defense. Spencer Rattler, he really hung in there for South Carolina this past weekend against North Carolina. He was sacked 9 times. Really just didn't have a lot of time to get the ball out, but towards the end of the game, he found a rhythm as South Carolina was trailing significantly, and Spencer Rattler just let it air out and ended up throwing for 353 yards. Kendall Milton did exactly what I thought he would. He was a solid presence for the Georgia backfield. He's the guy that's been in that running back room the longest, and while he only put up 53 yards, he did lead the team in carries. So I think that he'll still be involved throughout most of the season. Now, here's a head scratcher. Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama. This is a guy that I thought would kind of assume a prominent role for them. I'd have to look a little bit more into the specifics of this, whether it was an injury or just flat out did not show up. But 0 yards for him. Definitely going to be hard to trust any Alabama pass catchers until we see some consistency. I think Isaiah Bond was their best receiver, though, on Saturday. And then as a defense, couldn't ask for more from Tennessee against a Power 5 opponent, shutting down Virginia, letting up just 201 yards. So a very impressive showing for the Vols. And that brings my score to 205. Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty solid week for week number one. And on Ja'Cory Brooks, he was actually suspended for the first
Well, there
half.
you
I
go.
don't think any of us saw that. You would have won it anyways, but I didn't really see him on the box score, so I don't know if he even played. I don't know, he probably didn't even play because Alabama was just up so much, and Jalen Milroe was really just taking off and running the football. So even if Ja'Cory, if I would have given you like the Alabama wide receiver number one, it wouldn't matter because let's go on now to my team to
Hey,
see
that's
how
part of
they
college
did.
ball, you know?
Yeah,
These
yeah, in
guys
week
get
number one.
suspended.
But that's usually how we do it. If there's injury that pops up, we either repick or just go with the top dog on that team. So Joe Milton, 201 yards, not the game that I was expecting to. There was that one big play that he threw an absolute dime and the receiver just dropped it. That would have gave me
That would have
70
helped you.
plus yards there. So even 201 yards, I think that Joe Milton, this is just a start for him. I definitely think that he's going to have a phenomenal season. Quinshon Judkins, he had 2 touchdowns, also 60 yards. He had a slow start. I was tuning into this game. It was like 30 yards at the half, and then he piled on 30 more after the second half too. And then Griffin as well, he had 33 yards. I think that Will Rogers is more spreading it out. So maybe this is an offense that you just don't want to stay away from in SEC fantasy. It can be Griffin one week and can be another wide receiver getting a lot of yards the next week. And then Alabama's defense really rose up to the occasion. This is what I expected, 211 yards, giving me a total of 83. I'll take it as long as I'm not in the negatives to start off the season. But you getting 205 was definitely something to see in week number one. So before we close the book on week number one and turn our attention to week number two, let's get into our scores and results, see how we did in the pick'ems. This is our first recap. We recap one game last week, but now we have a full-on plate that we had to go through here. So our SEC Week 1 recap is presented by SeatGeek. You can use code BellyUpSports. Once again, that's all upper caps to receive $20 off of your first purchase. That can be concerts, musicals. I'm sure that there's plenty of, it doesn't have to be a sporting event. It could be concerts, theaters, plays, whatever you want to. SeatGeek has the tickets and events to do anything with your friends or family. So definitely go and use SeatGeek, use Belly Up Sports at the checkout. All right, let's get into the full slate here in week number one. And our week one recap starts off on what the game that really kicked off the week one activities. We had 2 Thursday night games, 2 SEC teams. The first one is Florida taking their talents on the road to number 14 Utah. We'll get into more of the bigger games and the blowouts. We'll say one word about it and then move on. But this one was definitely a game to watch. Last year's game, we saw Anthony Richardson. That was his best game of the season. Florida ended up upsetting number 7 Utah. This circumstance, though, it was 2 different quarterbacks. On one side, you had Florida going with Graham Mertz, a Wisconsin transfer. And then you had Utah pretty much going with a back and forth situation there at quarterback since Cam Rising is still dealing with a torn ACL injury he suffered in the Rose Bowl. But going into this game, you see the final score. Utah ended up winning this game 24-11. This was a pretty ugly game. Utah draw first blood. Literally the first play for them was a 70-yard touchdown throw. It was an absolute dot to the wide receiver. Florida's cornerback, so, coverage, but it was just a beautiful throw. They go up 7-0, and then after that, Utah was able to build their lead to 14-0. Florida was able to get a late score, got the 2-point conversion to get to 11. I think that Florida's defense definitely fared well against, the circumstances that they faced against the Utah team. You just didn't know which quarterback you were going to get. The first quarterback, he was throwing absolute dots, and the second quarterback was more of a dual threat. But this Florida offense, I think, is definitely going to be what's going to concern me for this Florida team. I definitely saw some encouragements for Florida. Their defensive line looked better than last year. Secondary, I think they're young. They're still talented. Give them some time. I'm not going to overreact on that defense, but I think that the main concern, I think that you're going to agree with this, is that Florida has to work things out on the offensive side if they want to keep this thing going. And, Billy Napier, is this, do or die year? We asked that this year. Who knows? But getting off to an 0-1 start, this was a hostile environment to go into. Not many of us saw this Gator team go on to beat Utah. So what were your early thoughts here on the Gators? Do you have the same concerns on their offense?
Yeah, I have a lot of the same concerns you do, and I think your recap was very solid of how this game went. I think for Florida, just the fact that they couldn't establish the run game is
Mhm.
concerning to me as well, because I know Utah's produced some pro talent on their defensive line in years past, and it's a well-regarded defense for being a West Coast team. But if you can't run here in the opener when teams are still trying to figure it out and against a non-SEC team, it's going to be very hard for Florida to, run against the likes of Georgia and Tennessee, and heck, they even got Florida State at the end of the year. So I think that's what really stood out to me. I thought this offense would go through Trevor Etienne and company, but that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, definitely wasn't the case either. Like you mentioned, the schedule definitely doesn't get easier. You face Georgia, Tennessee, the list goes on and on. Florida State, we saw how really good that they looked, especially in the second half of that game. So let's go on to the next Thursday night game that featured one of our SEC teams. Don't really not going to go into much detail in this one. It was the FCS versus an SEC team, but nonetheless, Missouri got off to a fantastic start. We saw Brady Cook, the quarterback. I think that we're both high on him. I think that there's a lot of potential with that offense. We saw Cody Schrader get a touchdown and get over a buck 30 yards. So that was definitely a good game. And also Missouri's defense, they came to play against South Dakota. So what was one word from this game, that Missouri's offense looked really good. Their defense was looking really good. So we're definitely going to be interested to see what Missouri goes on. So let's go on to the next one. Like I mentioned, we're not really going to talk much about these one. We'll get into a little bit more in this one since it was at one of our ACC versus SEC matchups. And I'll tell you
The
right
only
now,
one the SEC won.
yeah, the only one that the SEC came away with a victory. The other two, they did not look really good. But Virginia, with all the circumstances, from the tragedy that happened last year, this is going to be a team that's going to face a lot of adversity this season. The ACC looks like it's a one-horse race, maybe a two-horse race, a three, but especially with Duke and North Carolina. Clemson might be working their way out the way that their offense looked last night. But Tennessee getting the 49-13 victory, I think that a lot of people thought that Tennessee was easily going to cover this one. Their offense really didn't miss a beat from last year, with all the wide receivers that they lost, specifically Tillman and Hyatt. Joe Millen, you saw the potential with his big arm, but we also saw him, take off and run. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. That was definitely surprising to some, but this was pretty much a home game in Nashville. It was all orange. People are saying, like on Twitter, like Tennessee took over the stadium. Well, yeah, they're in Nashville. Of
It's a
course, they're
lot
going to take
closer.
over this stadium. But what are your early thoughts on the Vols? Are they going to be one of your teams you're going to be watching in the East?
Yeah, I think Tennessee is a team to look out for. I think that in some ways this offense is more complete than what Georgia brings to the table, but defensively, I still favor Georgia over what Tennessee brings, but can't complain about that front for Tennessee. They let up 200 total yards and they really looked dominant against Virginia. So yeah, I think I like where Tennessee's at. I think that this team got a lot of hype last year, deservedly so, and it kind of just fell apart when Hendon Hooker went down. But a lot of the parts of the team from last year are still there, minus the wide receivers that you mentioned going to the NFL. But clearly the offense is still clicking.
Yeah, I think that, Tennessee is going to be one of those teams to watch in the East. I think that their big game is not going to be until the season is pretty much wrapped up in October when the Vols host Georgia. It's probably going to be a top 10 matchup. I expect both of those teams to go into that matchup undefeated. I just don't think that anyone else in the East really stood out to me, specifically, South Carolina and Florida, the way that they looked. So it's looking like Tennessee and Georgia is going to be a 2-team race there in
Maybe
the SEC
Kentucky.
East. Or yeah, maybe even Kentucky, especially with Devin Leary getting experience at that position. Let's go on now. Moving on to the Saturday slate, we feature
There they are.
the same Kentucky Wildcats. Like I mentioned, it was a slow start. Ball State took the lead at one point, and then Devin Leary and Dane Key hook up in that connection. I think that Kentucky's defense really impressed me again. I think that Ball State, coming off believe of a MAC championship appearance against Toledo. So this was going to be one of those teams in the MAC. They're once again are going to compete for a MAC championship. So I think that Kentucky, even with the slow start, a really good show and putting up 44 points against a solid defense in Ball State. And once again, I think that Devin Leary, this is, going from Will Levis, not much of a drop off. Devin Leary has a lot of experience playing at the Power 5 level at NC State, coming over now to the SEC. I think that he's got all the weapons around him. So I think that Kentucky is definitely going to be one of those teams that are going to be sneaky. You don't want to see them every week. I think that they definitely have the quarterback, and then they also have the defense that can keep them in ball games every week. So let's go on now to the next SEC game here of week 1. And this is another game that we're not going to spend much time on. Western Carolina at Arkansas. It wasn't in Fayetteville. It was in Little Rock. This was usually whatever Arkansas plays against, one of these teams, maybe like Arkansas State, Western Carolina. They go on and play in Little Rock. And Arkansas's offense was very dominant. KJ Jefferson, seen a lot of power rankings have him being the top returning quarterback in the SEC. He definitely showed it. Raheem Rocket Sanders, I think he's one of our favorites. He really had a game himself. And then Arkansas defense, even with the two middle linebackers that they lost, with Bumper Pool, and also I can't even remember the other guy.
They had Drew Sanders.
Drew Sanders. He was an absolute beast for them last season. But this defense doesn't really skip a beat. I know it was Western Carolina, but definitely a good showing on both sides of the ball for the Hogs. I think that they could definitely be a dark horse team to contend in the SEC West, especially with their experience on offense and defense. So let's go on now to the next game of the week. We'll see if we have any more. And this one is also not one to really talk about too, but Ole Miss's offense. I mean, they wake up and put up 73. We saw, Oregon put up 81 this week. Oklahoma also put up 73. In week 1, Mercer really struggled against North Alabama. They ended up winning that game 17-7. So I wasn't really concerned about Ole Miss in this one. Their offense looked really good. Jackson Dart over 300 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Your guy that you picked, and Harris, he had a really good showing in his debut for the Rebels. So we'll see if Ole Miss is legit or not. They're going to find out real quick whenever they hit the road to Tulane. That's definitely going to be a matchup to watch. So we'll continue on with our week 1 slate here in the conference. This is going to be a lot of cupcakes here. UMass at Auburn. We saw the debut here of Hugh Freeze, and this Hugh Freeze offense looked explosive. Tank Bigsby no longer there. I think that their running back really showed up in this one. I was really impressed with Peyton Thorne. Even, the stats didn't really show it. Auburn's defense definitely played the way that I expected them to. They had a drop-off last year, but the coaching just wasn't there now. You got Hugh Freeze in the mix. UMass, one of the bottom teams in the group of 5 for them. I know last week they got their first win against Mexico State, but this is a different beast going into Jordan Hare with 90,000+ fans. It's not going to fare well for you. So Auburn, we're also going to find out about them. They have to hit the road out west, face a Pac-12 team in Cal. I think that's definitely going to be a challenge for them. So definitely excited to see what Auburn is going to do moving forward. I definitely think that they're going to be the team to talk about for a couple of weeks. So let's go on now to the next one. We're going to just continue on until we see a game that we can really elaborate on. And this is going to be continued quick reaction of Southeastern Louisiana, Mississippi State. First time we see a Zach Arnett led football team, and you saw more balanced offense. Like you mentioned, Will Rogers. It's not the Will Rogers game throwing 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. They got Jaquavius Marks involved in this game. Their defense, I think that's going to be one of their strong suits. Zach Arnett always kept this Mississippi State defense, in the top 15 in every category in the nation. So Mississippi State gets the easy victory against, in-state opponent here in Southeastern Louisiana. So Mississippi State got the better of them. We'll see what they can do against another Pac-12 team in Arizona. Going on to the FCS versus SEC.
We need some better games.
I swear, we're just going through the pick of the litter, going through our laundry here. But Georgia, got off to another slow start, as did Kentucky. But, with a new quarterback, it's going to happen. Carson Beck. Give him a couple of weeks. I'm not really going to overreact to this. Still 48-7 dominating defense. I just don't think that we're going to figure out how good this defense is. Maybe until South Carolina. If not, it's not going to be till whenever they face off against Tennessee in Neyland. So not really much to say about here. Georgia, the Dogs, just taking care of business, doing what they have to do as they remain the number one team in the land. Going on to the boring week one slate, we have New Mexico and Texas A&M. I cannot wait for conference play when we can actually dive into some of these games without breezing through them. But Texas A&M putting up 52 points in the opener by Petrino, calling the plays. Their offense looked really good behind Connor Weidman. Evan Stewart got a couple of touchdowns, but New Mexico, one of the bottom teams in the offense in production. Their offense is one of the worst in the country. They definitely saw it, and especially against Texas A&M. But nonetheless, a really good win for Texas A&M. Definitely a better start than they had last year. In their season opener, I didn't really feel good about them. But after this showing, I definitely think this is going to be a different A&M team heading into this season. So let's go on now to the next one. We'll see if we have any good games here in this slate. Nope, it continues on. Alabama A&M at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt moves to 2-0. Put up 47 points. Had a little bit of a struggle there in the first half. I feel like that was a story here in week number 1. Well, week number 2 here for Vanderbilt. They beat Hawaii last week by 7. Then they beat Alabama A&M. Was really a mismatch here. So they play Wake Forest, yada, yada, yada. Let's move on. This is what week 1 does it to us. And once again, I just don't think we're going to get to any of the talk here until we get to that North Carolina and South Carolina game, the way it's looking. But Middle Tennessee State traveled to Tuscaloosa. Alabama put up 56 points. We learned early in the week that Jalen Milroe got the start. I think he had an impressive debut. We're probably going to see a lot of the quarterbacks. Maybe we see them, Tyler Buchner going up against Texas, but Middle Tennessee State, they beat Miami last year, but it's not the same team on paper this season.
Alabama's no Miami.
Yeah, Alabama is way better than Miami. Alabama's defense is also way better than Miami. Middle Tennessee State got the garbage touchdown in the end. That usually what happens whenever Alabama's up by 50 plus. And then Nick Saban's like, all right, y'all can just rest up for Texas. Let's put in the backups and let's just go 1-0. So, putting up 56 points against anyone is definitely impressive. But there's just something about this Alabama team that's on the horizon that they're going to be back on top here of the SEC West. And then let's go on to the next one. I'm hoping that it's actually a game we can talk about. And
it's a game we can talk about.
All right, the game we can actually spend more than a second on. This was one of the game of the weeks. Game day was there. We saw Darius Rucker be the college game day pick'em, like he always is whenever the Gamecocks are involved. So our analysts did all pick South Carolina, and we were dead wrong. North Carolina, the Tar Heels put up a showing 31-17. Since, you got some representation for the Gamecocks, let me know what went wrong with South Carolina on Saturday night.
Yeah, I just think that South Carolina never got in a rhythm offensively, especially in the run game. I don't think any South Carolina fan expected to carry on Joyner to shoulder the load at running back. I thought that Juju McDowell would be the feature back. And I think that that just really shows how much the Gamecocks are missing out on Marshawn Lloyd. He transferred to the other USC in Los Angeles. So I think that, maybe he was the balance this offense needed. Spencer Rattler, when he had time, he looked pretty good. Good decision-making overall. But that was the key thing. He just didn't have time. The offensive line just was in shambles, and I think that contributed to the lack of the run game too. I just think that regardless of whether they were trying to run or pass, they just couldn't really get the ball beyond the line of scrimmage. And then for North Carolina, I think Mac Jones did a fantastic job planning for not Mac Jones. That's the Patriots quarterback, Mac Brown. The North Carolina head coach did a great job scheming against South Carolina in this game. And I think that, in this one, Drake May to me, I mean, I think he just solidified himself as the number 2 quarterback in the class. A guy like Rattler could be competing with him for that spot, but May just looked, much more developed and poised in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina didn't really have a running game. Like you mentioned, Marshawn Lloyd, that was one that we were questioning, Mark. Like, how did South Carolina let this guy just walk away from him? He went on to USC, played for the Trojans and Lincoln Riley. But like you mentioned, this offensive line was absolutely abysmal. I thought the advantage was going to be, I knew that Drake May was a better quarterback in this situation. But if you look at North Carolina's defense, they were one of the worst. But got to give credit to Gene Chisholm, in the offseason really did a fantastic job. South Carolina's defense, though, that's definitely going to be concerning. I think that if you're a South Carolina fan, the main concern is really the running game wasn't there. The offensive line, they have to get better because there's going to be defensive lines in the SEC. The Georgia's, even Florida's defensive line is going to be able to tear them apart. And then South Carolina's secondary struggled covering, against North Carolina's receiver. There was that one play that Drake May just threw it up. And the quarterback pretty much just gave up on the play and let North Carolina have an easy touchdown. So South Carolina better figure it out quick because in 2 weeks they have to face the number 1 team in the land in Georgia. So it could really turn up on its head. This was the team that some of us were saying this was a 9-win, 8-win team again coming off of it. Those 2 marquee wins. You beat Tennessee. You beat Clemson, you're feeling good about yourself. I know that you lost against Notre Dame in the bowl game, but a lot of production is returning. But South Carolina going to go back to the practice field. They'll face off against Furman. They should get the win there. And then this is where, the SEC play begins. Doesn't get any easier for South Carolina. So this was definitely a huge blow for their chances to definitely, improve on their bowl, where they go to the bowl rankings. And also if they can compete in the SEC East, that definitely might have went down the drain. So let's go on now to the next ACC versus SEC matchup. This was a lot of, people on the radar was saying that this was going to be the game of the week, potentially game of the year. Last year we saw it go down to the last second, extra point. But this year, Florida State once again got the best of LSU, 45-24. I'll go ahead and give you a quick game recap, and then we'll give you our thoughts on how this game turned out. So LSU got the ball first, and then 2 plays, you're down there in the 5. You saw Trey Bradford, number 32. A lot of LSU fans were saying, "Who the hell is number 32?" But he transferred to Oklahoma. He came back. It's just a weird circumstance. And then got Mason Taylor for a 15-yard gain, and then your 1st and goal. You got it's a 3rd down, but Florida State got a 15-yard penalty, and then you got a fresh 1st down, and then the game goes on. LSU goes for it on 4th and goal, which was definitely a risky call. Early in the game. But we saw Brian Kelly do that same situation. He's just an aggressive play caller. Florida State brought the pressure. They ended up getting the sack. Florida State, and really on that possession right there, they seized the momentum. They scored a touchdown. LSU on their next drive was able to score a touchdown too. It was a back and forth battle. I feel like 2 evenly matched teams. LSU had 2 4th downs that they couldn't convert inside of their own 10-yard line. I think that was definitely what decided the first half. If LSU say they completed that, this was like a 9-point game going into the half, but that was not the case. Just too many miscues in the first half. And, LSU took the 17-14 lead going into the half. But after that, Florida State went on to score 31 consecutive points on LSU defense. Main concerns here for me, the secondary is abysmal. I've been saying it, this whole entire offseason leading up to this game, that the secondary is going to be a main problem. Don't even know what they did with Harold Perkins. They try to not go from being that edge rusher that we saw last year now onto a true linebacker. But you got to give credit to Florida State. They took it to LSU in the second half. They were definitely the better team. Once again, Brian Kelly was outcoached in this matchup. I think that Mike Norvell had a game plan. You didn't really see any second half adjustments for LSU. You saw some with Florida State. They didn't work In the first half, they were able to figure it out. So Florida State, the way that Clemson looked, they're looking like the runaway in the ACC. So I think that, Florida State's definitely going to be one of those teams that are going to be in the top. But I know that since we're an SEC show, we're going to go on now to the LSU side of it. So give me your thoughts. Are you panicking yet after this blowout?
I'm not panicking yet, but I don't think this LSU team is where we thought they were. And I think maybe we underestimated Florida State just a
I
tad.
mean, you had them in the playoff. I know that.
Yeah, I do have Florida State in the playoff. I had them at the 4 seed. I had LSU at the 3 seed. There's still very much a scenario where that could happen. Maybe switched where Florida State's 3 and LSU's 4. But, I think Florida State, we knew they brought in a lot of talent in the transfer portal, and we knew they had some returning talent starting at Jordan Travis at quarterback. But I didn't know if they would have it all put together. Week 1 against LSU, I thought LSU had more of a cohesive group with guys returning from last year, but that just wasn't the case. Impact freshmen didn't really show up. Impact transfers didn't show up, and I think that defensive line really missed Mason Smith. Although I thought that Mekhi Wingo and Jordan Jefferson played pretty well on the defensive line. To me, it's just baffling how we were all having a good time watching the game. LSU was up by 3 or 4 points, and then, Florida State takes the lead for the first time, and LSU just completely panicked. Like, you thought that LSU was gonna, answer or tie it up with a field goal, and no, I mean, it was 21 straight Florida State points before a garbage time touchdown by LSU. It was just insane how quickly this game got out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, Florida State, whenever they got up 31-17, it just looked like this LSU team just gave up. After that, Florida State was able to do their will. Keon Coleman, he was an absolute MVP in that one. Everyone's going to talk about Jordan Travis, but Keon Coleman saw from the get-go that there was a mismatch, whether that was lined up against Deuce Chestnut or Major Burns. He was just going all in on them. But I think that, another note from this game, this is a 4th straight season opener that LSU has now dropped, goes all the way dating back to the COVID season when they lost to Mississippi State. Doesn't get any easier as you go on to Las Vegas to face off against USC next year, and then you go on to the other Death Valley to face Clemson. So who knows when the next season opening win is going to be? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be at Clemson? Who knows? But something's definitely going to have to change if LSU wants to get to where they thought they were, the team that they were. Brian Kelly said that after the game. We'll get into that quote later on in the show. But that is all for our week 1 slate. Let's see how we did in the picks. No disagreements, and that's where you see 12-2 across the board. Guess the 2 losses. Yep, the 2 biggest games of the weekend. UNC, USC, and FSU and
we can
LSU.
Pick the easy ones, folks.
Yeah, we only got the easy ones, the games that we just were breezing through, but we will see if we can continue that. Going on to the week 2 preview presented by Fanatics. You can use our Fanatics link to support your sports teams. And like I didn't do last time, I'll go ahead and keep that scrolling across the screen just in case. If you want to use that before you head to the big game this weekend, we got a lot of our SEC teams getting their season opener at home for the first time. So I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of excited fans around SEC country. So let's get into another full slate here in SEC week number 2. Starts off with another SEC versus ACC.
Oh,
we will see if the SEC can get their second win to try and even up this, I guess, ACC SEC big matchups here. So Vanderbilt and Wake Forest, we saw the same matchup. It was a different quarterback, though. Wake Forest had Sam Hartman. Hartman is now with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Vanderbilt hasn't really been impressed me. And, week 1, they struggled against Hawaii. And week number 2, they struggled in the first half against Alabama A&M before really going away. And then Wake Forest, though, their offense continued to reel even without Sam Hartman. So are you going to go with the Doors and the SEC are going to continue the ACC dominance over this conference?
I think the ACC adds another tally to the list here. I just think Vanderbilt's too flat on offense for me to trust them. I mean, I think defensively they're all right. I don't think Wake Forest is a contender in the ACC per se, but I just can't trust Vanderbilt to put up more than 20 points in any given game.
Yeah, I think that this game's definitely going to be closer than last year. I mean, Wake Forest just ran away with it, put up over 40 points. I think that Wake Forest will be able to score. Vanderbilt's offense has been up and down. Their defense has been a little bit shaky too. So I think that I'm going to go with Wake Forest too. Vanderbilt just hasn't really impressed me in these first 2 weeks. By week 3, you're going to want, not really play your best brand of football, but it's getting closer to SEC play. I know that we're only in week 2, but some teams are going to be going off against another SEC opponent in week number 3. You got to be ready whenever conference play comes around. I just don't think that this is still a mismatch for Vanderbilt. I think that Wake Forest at home, their environment's definitely going to be nuts. So I'm going to go with the Demon Deacons. Chet's going to go the opposite way. We have our first disagreement of the year. He's going to go with the Commodores, so he's going to anchor down and hope that Vanderbilt could come away with a victory and bring it home for the conference because the SEC needs it. It was a rough week, either between
Hold
the
your weight,
Pac-12
Vanderbilt. We need you.
or the ACC. So we will see if Vandy can bring home a victory back to the Music City. Our next one features the MAC once again. I mean, Ball State. 1 week you go and face Kentucky, and then the next one, your SEC tour continues with a 2-time reigning national champs in Georgia. Ball State coming off of that 44-14 loss to Kentucky. Georgia dominating UT Martin 48-7. Do you see that dominating performance continue for this Georgia team?
Yeah, I think that Georgia will come out even better this week. Got the jitters out with Beck, and I think this offense will cruise.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the weeks go on and on. I think that this Carson Beck in this offense, haven't we forgot that Brock Bowers is still on this roster?
Yeah,
we haven't seen him in
target.
SEC fantasy, but I tell you right now, his name is going to start appearing up whenever you get into conference play. I think that Georgia, this is a runaway, their defense. I picked them for a reason. I think it's going to be a mismatch against Ball State's offense. So I think that Georgia's going to win this one. They're probably going to cover, not going to be close. All rolling with the dogs in this one. So we have Georgia moving on to 2-0. Let's go on to our next matchup. It features an in-state battle, FCS versus SEC. In this one, Eastern Kentucky at Kentucky. Kentucky coming off of a dominating performance against Ball State. Devin Leary and Dane Key are looking to continue that. I'm pretty much sure that you're going to go with Kentucky since you picked their defense.
Yeah, I'd be in a world of hurt if Kentucky lost this game because I do have the Kentucky Wildcats in our SEC fantasy segment. So I'm expecting big things out of the Wildcats this week. I think the defense looked good last week. I think the offense will only get better. They got some weapons, they added Ray Davis from Vanderbilt last year to kind of be the bell cow back, and then your guy Dane Key and Devin Leary. That should be a pretty good trio for Kentucky this year.
Yeah, I think that I expect a faster start for this Kentucky offense. I think that Devin Leary is going to have his way against Eastern Kentucky. I think that they're going to cruise in this one. I think that Kentucky, we're all in on this team last year. We'll see if that, drink more of that blue Kool-Aid as the season goes on for you. Get back on the bandwagon. But I'm going to go Big Blue Nation, and Chet is also going to go with Kentucky in this one. And our next matchup features another top 25 matchup. Didn't really get much of this in week number 1. We had one top 10 matchup of Florida State and LSU. That was much of a letdown. We'll see if this game lives up to the billing. We talked about it a little bit on SEC Fantasy. Now we'll get into our picks and predictions. Number 20, Ole Miss hits the road at number 24, Tulane. Ole Miss coming off of a walloping of Mercer, 73-7. Tulane, like I mentioned at the start of the show, coming off of a very dominating victory against South Alabama. South Alabama was trying to wear the helmets, saying that they were the home of Mardi Gras, but that's just not what you do whenever you go to New Orleans, because they're going to show you how it's done in Tulane with Michael Pratt. They lost Ty J. Spears. That offense did not miss a beat. South Alabama is a very good football team. Tulane's defense, also created some timely turnovers. So I think they're going to have to do that again if they want to have success against Ole Miss. So are you going to go with the Wave or going to go with the Rebels?
This one's tough for me because I do like the intrigue of this game being on the road at Tulane. I think that's a pretty tough trip for Ole Miss. Tulane, I was talking to my father-in-law, and he said that that's a tough ticket to get, that this has been sold out for months.
It's been sold out.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's going to be hard for Ole Miss to get fans in there. I think Tulane's going to have a good advantage there. But I mean, had I picked this game a week ago, I would go with the upset with Tulane winning. But I mean, when someone scores 73 points, it just jumps out at you. And I think Ole Miss is pretty legit. I think they weren't talked about much this offseason. I think that LSU and Texas A&M are getting more hype than Ole Miss, even Arkansas. I think that Ole Miss is going to be undefeated by the time they play against LSU and could knock the Tigers back a game in the SEC standings.
I agree with you. I think that Ole Miss is definitely one of my teams I'm keeping a real close eye on. I think that, Alabama is definitely going to be the talk of the town. They're going to be at the top. But Ole Miss in this offense, I think that they can compete with anybody. I think that going up against Alabama, we'll see how the quarterback plays for them. But if you didn't know, Tulane was a part of the SEC back in the old days. So this is an old SEC rivalry that happened. But I'm going to go with Ole Miss. Like you mentioned, you put up 73. It's just hard not to recognize. I definitely think that Tulane can make this a game. The spread right now, Vegas has the Rebels as a 7-point road favorite. Tulane is not going to be afraid. They beat USC and Caleb Williams. I know that Caleb Williams was a little bit injured in that one. Facing off against Jackson Dart, I think the defensive matchup is there. I think that Tulane could definitely win a shootout in this one. But if you're Tulane, you want to create those turnovers that you saw in week number one, to alleviate some pressure from Michael Pratt. Michael Pratt could definitely do it. He showed it against South Alabama. We'll see if he can do it. I think this is going to be an instant classic. I'm definitely excited to see Ole Miss travel to Tulane. I think that there's going to be a lot of Ole Miss fans that are going to be making the trip as well. Not a far road trip. There's a lot, on the coast that a lot of Ole Miss fans there. So it's definitely going to be, majority Tulane, but I would not be shocked if we see a lot of Ole Miss fans travel to Tulane, and we'll see if Chet is also going to go Ole Miss. He is, so we are going to go.
Congrats, Tulane.
Oh yeah, well, we saw last week we're all sweeping everybody, and then the two ACC teams bite us in the butt. So we'll see if the Green Wave. I'm sure that a lot of people are rooting for them. If they win this game, vault them up to the top 15. I mean, beating a caliber of opponent like Ole Miss, I think that Tulane deserves to be in the top 15, and maybe even be in the playoff discussion. We'll see but they have to win this game for that to come to fruition. So we will see. The next one, we have another SEC versus ACC. I don't know why the SEC did this to themselves, but number 23, Texas A&M at Miami. This was the home and home that's going to be wrapped up. We saw them face off in College Station. Wasn't that very good of a game, 17-9. It was two bad offenses, especially on Miami's side, only putting up 9 points. But Miami got off to a really good start. They beat the other Miami, so I guess we learned who the real Miami is. I think that we've been learning for over a decade now. But Texas A&M, like we mentioned, they put up 52 points against New Mexico. I think that if they put up 52 against Miami, then I think that a lot of people are going to take notice, and Bobby Petrino might get a raise if he puts up 52 against Miami. But who do you have in this one? You're going to go with the SEC getting a win here over the ACC. You're going to go with the Canes getting a little bit of revenge on the Aggies.
This one was a toss-up for me. Like you mentioned last year, it wasn't a very pretty game, and Texas A&M won with only 17 points. I think Miami's a little better this year. I don't think either one of these teams will make a ton of national noise by the end of the season. It just feels like a trap game for Texas A&M. We're kind of finally giving them some respect. I feel like they're appropriately ranked, and I just think it all falls apart for them. And a narrow loss against Miami here. I think that these teams split the series, and I just think it's the ACC's year over the SEC from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good game to watch here at 2:30 here on ABC. Texas A&M, we'll see if their offense can do it against Miami defense. Miami's defense looked good against Miami of Ohio, but we saw last year the defense of the Canes wasn't really what we expected. Miami is hungry for a big victory. Mari Cristobal in his first year back in this, school that he played for. So I'm going to go with the Canes. I think that this is a program that this is just hungry for a big win. They need a win to really boost this program up. I mean, just look at what Florida State's doing. I mean, if you're a Miami fan, you got to be wondering, like, man, that should be us and not us being like losing to Middle Tennessee State like we did last year. So I think that Miami gets it done. It won't be that pretty of a game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game like it was last year. I think that it's not going to be 17-9, but I think that both of these schools will get into the 20s. But I'm going to go with the Canes at home. We'll see if they pack a Hard Rock Stadium because I think that this program definitely deserves a really big crowd for SEC school coming in here. So, Chet, it's not going to go with the sweep. He's going to go with Gig'em. He's going to go with the Aggies to get the road victory. So definitely feel confident in Miami pick. If we saw 3 U's, then this was not going to happen. But now Chet has another disparity in this one, so Chet could definitely gain a game up if the Aggies were able to pull off this road victory against Miami. So we will see who
I thought
takes
you were
this
going to
one.
be the A&M faithful. Chet usually goes all in on Miami.
Yeah, he usually does go on Miami, but not on the gridiron. It's only on the hardwood. So he's going to go with the Aggies on the road to get the big victory. And we go on to the next game here in the Week 2 slate, Kent State at Arkansas. Arkansas put up 56 points. Kent State, they did not look very good in week number 1 against UCF. UCF entrance to the Big 12 was a good one for them with former SEC quarterback John Ross Plumlee putting on a show. So not really much of a pick here. I think that we're all going Woo Pick Suey, I would have to assume.
Yeah, I think Arkansas looked sharp week 1. I think they can continue that here into week 2.
Yep, so all rolling with the Razorbacks. I feel like early on we're all high on Arkansas. We'll see if that trend continues in the 2023 season. Their offense is looking potent. Next one, Austin Peay at number 9, Tennessee. I think that this one is going to just be all orange here. I think that Austin Peay, they put up 23 points in their first matchup. This is a different defense. Tennessee's defense has a lot of young talent. Offense with Joe Milton. Your guy, Jalen Wright. Have to assume we're all rolling with the T's this game.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's got this one in the bag. I think Tennessee, like you said, they could cruise until we see them play against Georgia.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if we see an undefeated versus undefeated matchup. It just screams game day is going to win to Neyland that week. So let's go on now to game day. Where they're going to be at is the game of the week here on SEC Talk. We're going to go ahead and claim this game. I'm sure everybody in the nation are already saying that.
I agree with that claim.
The game of the week. But you know what? We'll put our flag right here, SEC Talk. Number 11, Texas at number 3, Alabama. Both of these teams respectively moved up in the AP poll of the two top 10 teams that fell this past weekend. Texas got a really nice victory against Rice, Alabama, while at Middle Tennessee State. Everyone's going to be talking about the game of last year. We all saw it. Alabama was the 20-point favorite to cover. That ultimately didn't happen. Alabama and Bryce Young, we saw, that first offense, not really have their way against the Texas defense. It looked pretty good. We saw last year too, Quinn Ewers really have a nice showing. He got hurt. Hudson Card came in and then Alabama kicked that game-winning field goal with 20 seconds left, and they ended up winning that game. So I think that everyone's going to be hyping this game up. I think that this is going to find out, is Texas for real this year? Or are they not? Or is Alabama for real? Or are they not? So I think that, like the LSU Florida State game, we're going to figure out who's legit. So are you going to go with the Tide at home? Are you going to go with hook 'em horns to pull off the road upset?
Oh, man. Part of me wants Texas to get revenge for last year's showing. Texas had them on the ropes. They probably should have won the ball game. But I just feel like we've heard so much about Texas this offseason and not enough about Alabama. And to me, that's just rat poison. And Alabama will find a way to win this one. If it was in Austin, I would flip the other way. But I just like Alabama at home here. I just think that provides them an extra factor. Maybe lets the offense kind of establish themselves over the first couple drives and not be punched right in the mouth by the fan noise.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be one of the keys to watch. This is not in Austin. This is in Bryant-Denny Stadium, one of the most hostile environments here in the SEC. I think you brought up a good point. The rat poison. Nick Saban says it all the time. This Alabama team, by some has been overhyped. I think we're really holding on the brakes. Until Nick Saban's there, Alabama is going to be very good, and they're going to be the king of the SEC. I think that Georgia is definitely starting to make their grand entrance in. If they could definitely do it back-to-back years, that would definitely be really impressive. That would go down in history. But hold the brakes on Texas here. I think that we buy into this team so much every year and they just lay an egg. We'll see if they can. If they come away with victory here, then they're going to run away with the Big 12. The Big 12, there's not really a team. Oklahoma, they put up 73 against Arkansas State. Their offense is looking good. Texas Tech, a team that I thought was going to play a dark horse, and they lose to Wyoming on the road. And so they're probably not going to be as good as I thought they were. So
Baylor lost as well.
I know that. Yeah, that was just embarrassing. TJ Finley, we heard about him, the former Auburn and LSU quarterback. He got the victory there. But last year's game was close. I think it's a complete 360. Alabama is only a 7-point favorite. I think they win this one 14 plus. I think Alabama, this is where they put their foot down and saying, we are still the kings of college football. We're not going anywhere. I think that Texas, this is not going to be even close. I think the atmosphere is going to be too much for them. I think Alabama's defense is one of the best in the country. Dallas Turner in the middle, their corners with Kool-Aid and McKinstry. That's going to be too much. I just don't think that Texas has the weapons that they did in last year's game, especially for running back, explosive running back, and Bijan Robinson. So I think that Alabama rolls in this one. It's not going to be pretty. So I think that's going to be the similar that we saw in the other close top 10 matchup being a blowout. I think it's going to be the same. The Tide are going to roll in week number 2. Chet is going to go with Alabama. So a clean sweep here in Alabama. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Please, Lord, let us be right this time. If we go all this week of picking all Alabama and then Texas wins, then we might just have to quit. So
that'll be okay.
So we'll just hope for an Alabama win to keep the positivity rolling on. So let's go on now to the next one. Middle Tennessee State goes on to the road. It's not Bryant Denny, but still SEC country. I mean, you got to feel for Middle Tennessee and Ball State entering the SEC tour. But Missouri looked really impressive against South Dakota. I think that their offense is going to continue to roll. So you have Missouri against Middle Tennessee.
I have Missouri taking the win here. Yeah, I mean, look, Middle Tennessee played the number 3 team and then Missouri, and then Ball State gets to play the number 1 team and then Kentucky. I mean, I think that's a pretty even slate there for those 2 out-of-conference foes. But, yeah, Missouri, I think that this team will be middle of the road at best in the SEC this year, but they should be good enough to take care of business against Middle Tennessee.
I think so too. I wasn't really impressed with Middle Tennessee State. I think they'll be able to score more than 7. I mean, this is in Alabama's defense, but I picked Cody Schrader for a reason. I think that Missouri is going to cruise in this one. Should be pretty convincing win there. So let's go on out to Jet's pick. He's going to go with MIZZOU. So I'm literally liking all this SEC talk. Picks here, so we're all rolling through. We had those 2 discrepancies that Chet did. So right now, Wade and I are just on the same page. I mean, that's why
we do this for a reason, right?
Co-host. So, all right, let's go on to a game. I think that's very important for one team. Grambling is coming in for the first time. We saw Southern, and then we're seeing another HBCU team, the Tigers versus the Tigers in this one. LSU dropped all the way to 14, like we mentioned at the start. Not a very impressive showing. We'll probably see both of the quarterbacks. I'm sure that Garrett Nussmeier is going to get his way, and then it's going to, the talk from the fans is going to be Garrett Nussmeier is going to look really good, and they're going to say, calling for we want him being the QB1. So are you going to be going to this game, Wade? If you are, definitely give some insight on this game. And what are you looking for LSU trying to bounce back after that horrific loss in week number 1?
Yes, I will be going to this game, and I should have an extra ticket if you would like to accompany me for a live viewing. But yeah, I think LSU bounces back. I think that there should be no reason for concern here. I think that, LSU will show us why they are a top 25 team. Let's call them that. And I think Jaden Daniels will look good. He'll be able to get his reads. I think the offensive line won't be under constant fire, and hopefully LSU can establish a run game, because I sure didn't see Trey Bradford getting the first carry for LSU this year. So I would like to see Nolan Cain, Josh Williams, the freshman Caleb Jackson, maybe even the other freshman Trey Hawley. I'd like to see them all kind of rotate.
We didn't even see Logan Diggs either.
Yeah, we didn't even see Logan Diggs. So yeah, I'd like to see the run game get established here. I mean, yes, the pass game had some room for improvement, but it's going to be a long season if LSU can't run the ball.
What was the same thing that we were talking about all season, that you can't put too much on Jaden Daniels, and that's exactly what happened in game number 1. The rushing game, outside of that Josh Williams 44-yard, they ran the ball 14 times for 11 yards. If that
Not gonna
happens,
cut it, guys.
you're not going to be able to win an SEC game. It could cut against a team like Grambling, but it's not going to cut up against Ole Miss, Mississippi State. The list goes on and on. Every SEC team, if you do that, even the list, I'm not even going to talk about it. We're going to definitely get into that whenever LSU gets into the meat of their schedule. But I think that LSU, this is a game. This is a get right game. I'm sure that a lot of LSU fans are saying, why didn't we put Grambling before Florida State? But you could also argue that Florida State was ready. They didn't even play a week 0 game. So I think that LSU wins this one pretty convincingly. I think it's going to be not really a raucous environment. I think that the environment's still going to be good, but it's not going to be as joyous coming off of a loss. But I think that LSU fans will show up. Grambling fans are definitely going to be a lot of them. I think that their fan base is definitely hungry to get into that stadium and that environment too. But I think that LSU, this is more important for them to get on track. And Chet is also going to go with the Tigers. We all three went with the Tigers last week and took the L, but I think that this week we will see if that happens. So we continue on. We have a couple more games. We're getting into our late night action. We have McNeese at Florida. Florida, I think, is another one of those teams that really need this game to get back on track and find their identity. So do you have the Gators doing that?
Yeah, I don't think it'll necessarily be the prettiest game for Florida, but another get-right game, kind of like the LSU one. Florida should score at least 35 points in this one. I think the defense overall is pretty good against Utah, all things considered. I think they kept them in the game. So I look for Florida to take this one handedly. I think it'll be like 35-3.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this is handle your business game for Florida. I think that the offense, Graham Mertz, I think that he didn't have that bad of a game. It's just the Utah defense is really strong. Go up against McNeese. I think you handle your business. I think that the Gators at home in front of the Swamp, their crowd is definitely hungry to see just something positive on the football field. I think they get that this week in week number 2. Chet is going to go with the Gators, so definitely nice to see the Gator logo back on our screen. We were all picking Utah last week, but we're all going with the Gators against McNeese. So we have 3 more games to look at. This one is the Pac-12 versus the SEC. The Pac-12, the lone Pac-12 versus SEC matchup, Utah, Florida. We'll see if the SEC can get some revenge against the Pac-12. Arizona and Mississippi State. We saw this matchup in the desert. Arizona got handled to. It was a really good game in the first half, and then Will Rogers and that offense really took off. So do you have Mississippi State going 2-0 against the Wildcats?
Yeah, last year we got Pac-12 after dark with Mississippi State. And this year it looks like it's another night game. So will it be some of the same magic for Mississippi State? I think so. I think this team, like you hit on earlier, maybe they're not the air it out 24/7 type team anymore, but I think they're efficient on both sides of the ball. And I think Arizona is still a bottom tier Power 5 team, like we touched on during SEC Fantasy. So I don't think Mississippi State will have any problem moving the ball. And unless Arizona brought in like the next Johnny Manziel or something, I don't see them moving the ball well enough against this stout defense.
Yeah, this defense is going to play every week. I think that this is not even going to be close of a game. The line's 10 on our bets. We have our best bet segment on Sports Scramble, and this was mine, Mississippi State to cover the 10. So I'm going to stick with it. So I'm going to go with Mississippi State. Arizona, they definitely have an experienced quarterback. But it's one thing to go from playing at Arizona to going traveling to Starkville with 60+ thousand fans ringing a cowbell and hearing it for 3 to 4 hours in your ears. So it's something, an environment that they're not used to. So Mississippi State, they get the win here. They face off against LSU, a team that's going to be real. And so I think that's going to be an insane environment in week number 3 when the Tigers face off against the Bulldogs. I think the winner of that is definitely set up, especially if Mississippi State, they pull off the upset. Then I think that Mississippi State's, a lot of people picking them to be the bottom team. I just didn't see it. But I think if they pull off the upset in week number 3, a lot of people are going to be talking, and a lot of people are going to be talking about Baton Rouge too in LSU if they lose that game and start the season 1-2 after high expectations. So Chet's going to go with the Bulldogs. Not really many times we see Chet go with the in-state of Mississippi State and Ole Miss, but this week, once again, he goes 2-0 with those teams. So now we go on to Furman in South Carolina. South Carolina really needs this one. Furman is a team that we always see in SEC. I feel like every season Furman's going up against somebody in the SEC. This time they draw an in-state opponent in South Carolina. So do you have the Gamecocks going 1-1 before their big test on the road to face off against Georgia?
Yeah, I think South Carolina rights the ship here. I've been to this matchup before, as you mentioned. It's a pretty common occurrence with Furman either playing the Gamecocks or the Clemson Tigers or somewhere around the South. And I think it's just what South Carolina needed. They got a little banged up in this one, so they can try some new things before that big showdown against Georgia. But look, South Carolina, LSU, Florida, all three teams that got embarrassed against Power 5 teams that just absolutely couldn't run the football, and the offensive line didn't look good. So all three of those teams need to take advantage of these FCS games to just really figure out how to run the football.
I agree with you. So it's going to be a quick pick for me. I think that South Carolina gets it done. No upset picks yet for Chet this week. I'm sure surprised on that. We do have one more game to get to. We'll see if we have any more. So we have Auburn traveling all the way to Berkeley, California. Don't really see this too often. We saw Florida go on the road to Salt Lake City. Last year, we saw Mississippi State travel to Arizona. Auburn, though, a program like this, never I've seen travel this far out to the West. Will definitely be a challenging environment. It's always a challenging road trip for an SEC team going all the way to Pac-12 country. Better get used to it, because if you see the realignment, I mean, it's going to be all over the place.
Not
It's
too
going to
far-fetched.
be going all the way. So do you have Auburn surviving this road test at Cal?
This one's tough. I mean, I really think that this one has the making of an upset. I really am not high on Auburn this year. I had them finishing last in the SEC West. But I was really impressed that they put up 60 points against UMass, and I think this offense kind of is humming. I think it's just enough to get by California. I just don't think that Cal's all that good. And I think this could be a momentum builder for Auburn. I mean, if they can win a road game like this before they get into SEC play, it definitely helps their cause.
I agree. I think I think they're they're probably going to get off to a slow start just because of the environment and the road trip. There's probably going to be a little bit of jet lag. They're definitely going to get there, a couple of days before, get ready, get their game plans in before. It's going to be a late one. In the Central Time, it's going to be 9:00. It's Pac-12 after dark. So Auburn, you better drink some coffee or something to stay up for this one. But I think they passed their test, like I mentioned. I really bought into California's team. I look at all the other Pac-12 teams, even Colorado. I think it's just better than them this season. So I think that Auburn may struggle late. You'll see at the end of the first quarter, maybe it's like a 7-3 type of game. But after that, I think Auburn cruises to a victory. I'm not really, going to be shocked in this one. I think that Auburn is going to really fare well out there on the West Coast. And like I mentioned, Chet's going to go with the upset here.
Can't go a whole week without it.
Yeah, he told us that he meant to pick Auburn, but he's going to go with the Golden Bears. So this is his first upset. I'm sure it's going to be many. He usually likes to pull the trigger on some every week. So we'll see if Cal can deliver. But I think that Auburn is definitely in for the challenge against the Pac-12.
I think it's a fair upset pick.
Yeah,
for sure. If
it's
you're going to throw one
fair.
out
It's not one of his stupid ones that we've seen in the past, like Vanderbilt knock off Alabama. But this is definitely more, doable. I'd say that. So let's go on to one more segment before we shut the book here on our week 2 show, and it's our hot topics. The first one, a big blow for South Carolina. Their top linebacker, Muhammad Kaba. We saw last year that his right knee got him out for the season out of his left knee. So got a feel for the guy. He's out for the remainder of the season. Definitely a big blow for South Carolina. I'm going to skip over the LSU one. I want to get to that, to the last one. But first, I think second question I have for you is Alabama on upset alert this week against Texas. Give me a percentage chance on Alabama losing this game.
I'm going to be pretty vanilla and put it at 33%. I think that Alabama's either going to blow by the spread of, or the line of 7 points. I mean, I think they're going to win by like 15 plus, or they're going to lose this one. I don't think there's much of an in-between. I think we'll see this week if Alabama's got it or if they don't. If they come out flat and get bossed around at home by Texas, then yeah, this team's probably looking at 2 or 3 losses. But if they come out and show Texas who's boss, I mean, I think this team is the team to beat in the SEC West.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a proven game there in T-Town. The next one, which SEC team impressed you the most during week 1?
Ah, that's a great question. I have to go with the shock factor of Ole Miss. I know it wasn't a huge win, just beating an FCS team, but that 77 or 73 points is really sticking with me. And considering other SEC teams like LSU and South Carolina disappointed, I got to go with Ole Miss. I think that they kind of jumped a whole tier to me in the SEC standings.
And I say this one for a reason because this is the hottest topic. I feel like every show that you go to has been talking about LSU. So both of us, you had them in the playoff in our early college football playoff predictions. Go back to a week ago, we had this same LSU team, compete against Georgia for the SEC championship. So with that being said, are you changing your expectations for this LSU team after what you saw in week number 1 against the Noles?
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of playing a marquee out-of-conference matchup. It's not like, losing to Ole Miss or Mississippi State or something week 1. I mean, LSU, just like last year, has everything to play for within the conference. And Florida State, very well might be a top 4 team at the end of the year. So I'm not panicking just yet, but I am changing my expectations. I think this LSU team will be better than most, but I think they're more of a 10-2, 9-3 kind of team.
Yeah, I think look at the schedule. Mississippi State. If you get past that one, you got Arkansas earlier in the year. Go on the road to Ole Miss. I mean, the way your secondary is looking, that's definitely going to be
To me, that's a loss right now.
A challenge. But I think you bring up a good point. I think that if you're looking on like what loss hurts the most, I think Clemson's loss hurts the most to them.
Yeah,
that was an in-conference game. They're already starting 0-1. Look at Florida State. And say Clemson loses to Florida State, which is right now probably going to happen. They go 0-2. No divisions anymore in the ACC. North Carolina and Duke. Duke already has the advantage. I know that Duke, their schedule is definitely challenging. Don't get me wrong, but I think that opens up the door for the North Carolinas and Duke if Clemson starts off 0-2, and if Florida State wins that one, the rest of them is just a piece of cake. So I think that if you're looking at which loss hurts the most, definitely Clemson. I'm not saying LSU. They have like the bright golden gate for the SEC championship, but really the only way to get to the playoff is win out. If they lose one more game, they're pretty much out. Last year we saw them lose 2 early games, but the difference was they beat Alabama. If they would have, not laid an egg against A&M, they beat Georgia. They were going to be the first team, the 2-loss team to make the playoffs. So it's pretty much the same scenario that LSU was dealt with last year with the early loss. We'll see if the Tigers can bounce back and make a run for it. The difference is this game this year is in Tuscaloosa. It's not in Baton Rouge. So you lose that luxury this year. So those are hot topics. It's going to get hotter as the season goes on, as we'll see if any coaches get into the hot seat mix. We'll definitely see. But that's going to be it for our show in week number 2. Hope everybody enjoyed this week's version. We're definitely happy that you joined us on your Tuesday night. We'll be back here next week recapping a busy slate in week number 2. Recap Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tulane, and also the Pac-12 out west with Auburn and Cal and all the above. And we'll also look forward to week 3. Like I mentioned, we'll have some of the in-conference games. So whenever we get into the in-conference games, I like to pick some marquee games outside of the conference. I haven't been really doing that. There hasn't been really much to talk about outside of the conference.
Cupcakes.
There hasn't been really that many marquee matchups. But hope you all enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you back here next time here on SEC Talk.